One of the ways that evolutionists argue for their theory is to claim that it is a fact, that it is true, such as in this book by evolutionist Jerry Cohen, Why Evolution is True. Now, Cohen doesn't mean that it's true from a metaphysical or religious perspective. He means from a scientific perspective. He means that the scientific evidence is so overwhelming, so compelling, that the theory must be true from a scientific perspective, beyond all doubt. It reminds me of a college professor I had who said that he had solved the protein folding problem. This was a few years ago, and the protein folding problem had definitely not been solved. After class, I asked him about it, and he really had nothing but equations on the board, and it was frankly a little embarrassing. I told another professor about it, and his response was, "I didn't know that." Well, evolution is true. I didn't know that either. In fact, there are many problems with the theory of evolution. There are many scientific contradictions to the theory of evolution. Maybe someday it will be discovered to be true. It's not the case today. All of the major fundamental predictions of evolution have turned out to be false. There's no mechanism to describe how life could have originated and diversified on Earth. Yes, you have random mutations. They don't do the job. It's long been known that random mutations aren't going to do the job. Natural selection does not help, doesn't solve the problem. So there's a big problem between the claims of evolutionists, a big gap between the claims of evolutionists and what the science actually says. I thought I saw the same problem maybe last week in consciousness. An article in Nautilus had the title, What's So Difficult to Understand About Consciousness, or something like that. I was worried that they were going to go there. They were going to claim, well, we really have got this problem underhand and we've figured it out. But much to my satisfaction, I was glad to see that was not the case. It was just a teaser headline. And one of the people interviewed in the article was Anil, Seth, a researcher in consciousness. And he's made some good progress, has done a lot of good work. But he also agreed in the article that, no, we have not solved consciousness. So I was happy to see that. I want to show you that article, and then I want to show you the implications of what they're saying. So let's have a look. Here is that Nautilus article from last week. I'll put the URL in the description section for you, and you can see from the title here, what's so hard about understanding consciousness? Well, consciousness has defied explanation for thousands of years. That's what's so hard about it. There is no explanation for consciousness. You can see how I might have wondered if this was going to be a little bit like my college professor who claimed he had solved the protein folding problem. So let's have a look at what this article says here. Skipping down now, it interviews two researchers, Anil, Seth, and Antonio Damasio. And here it describes some of Seth's work. It says here, Seth lays out his theory of controlled hallucination, that our perceptual experiences of the world are inventions of the brain, governed by a system of predictions, and makes the case that consciousness is intimately tied to the interior of the living body. Did you have a little trouble following that? It's because it's speculation. There isn't a clear train of scientific thought here. This is vague speculation. Let's move on here. Damasio answers this question about whether or not consciousness is really a hard problem after all. And he says here, the hard problem, that is treating consciousness as a hard problem. The hard problem makes it look like consciousness is impossible to solve. It doesn't give you any out. Every bit of evidence that we have is that the mysteries of the universe have been gradually solved by science. I don't see why consciousness should be any different. Okay, that's a failed argument. That's both invalid and unsound. Invalid because the conclusion does not necessarily follow from the premises. Just because you haven't seen something doesn't mean it doesn't exist. But it isn't even a sound premise, a sound argument. The premises are false. Every bit of evidence that we have is that the mysteries of the universe have been gradually solved by science. No, that's not true. There are all kinds of phenomena that science does not explain, has not explained. If it does in the future, fantastic. Let's research it. Let's research those things. Let's keep on going. But there are all kinds of phenomena in the natural world that science has not successfully explained. It simply is not true that every bit of evidence we have is that the mysteries of the universe have been gradually solved by science. I mean, that's just laughable. Skipping down here, I think what engenders this possibility of us being conscious right now, and of my knowing that I'm talking to you and seeing your faces on the screen and vice versa, is fundamentally linked to affect. It is a feeling through and through, a feeling of the continuity of life in my organism. So again, if this doesn't quite make sense to you, it shouldn't. This is vague speculation. This is not a clear scientific line of thinking. Skipping down here, the essence of the consciousness process is actually simpler than what people want to make it. There's no hard problem, really. Well, yeah, if we're going to accept bare assertions and vague speculation as a scientific explanation, then sure, it's not a hard problem anymore. This is just like astrology. Let's just make things up. Skipping down here now, this is Anil, Seth responding. It is true that consciousness doesn't seem to be the kind of thing that can be explained in terms of physical processes. But the fact that something seems mysterious now does not mean it will always seem mysterious. Again, a completely bogus argument. You imagine a creationist or a flat earther saying, well, the flat earth doesn't seem right now, but someday it might. You can always appeal to future findings. Current problems are going to be solved in the future, so don't worry about them. It's not really a problem. That's not the way science works. We need to represent and characterize science accurately and truthfully and not make things up. And so the next question leads right off of that. It asks, what do you think about the future of research on consciousness? Would you be willing to bet that consciousness can ultimately be solved? Christoph Koch bet David Chalmers a fine case of wine that scientists would be able to identify the neural correlates of consciousness by 2023. And that's just the neural correlates. That's not even a full explanation of consciousness. Continuing, Francis Crick predicted that we would be able to explain consciousness by the end of the 21st century. Seth's first response here, fortunately, was, well, people have lost many bottles of wine making these kinds of bets. That's right. Continuing with Seth here, I'm going to give an annoyingly equivocal answer. It depends. Okay, so Seth isn't going to say one way or another, but he says here, on some days I wake up in the morning and consciousness seems as mysterious as it ever did. Okay, good. Now he ends up here saying, I don't think we'll have a eureka moment where somebody says, here's the answer. Okay, so in other words, we don't have the answer right now. This is about as close as we're going to get to admitting there's no answer. But to summarize here, in other words, currently we do not have an answer to the problem of consciousness. So, for consciousness, there are no known natural laws, natural processes, or natural causes to explain what we observe. That's what we can take away from this article, take away from the research in general. When we get past all the maybes, could'ves, and would'ves, all the caveats, all the flowery language, all the metaphors, all the meaningless speculation, we don't have a scientific explanation for consciousness. We cannot explain what we observe. This is not a partisan claim. This is not a religious claim. This is not a theological claim. It's not a philosophical claim. What I'm saying is simply a scientific fact. That's the way it is. Okay, so we've looked at the article. We've seen what we can glean from it. What does all this mean? Okay, so in biology, we find phenomena with no known natural cause. We just looked at consciousness. It's not the only thing. But for consciousness, right now, there's no known natural cause. Without a natural cause, evolution is impossible. Evolution cannot evolve something that does not have natural causes. That's the way evolution works. It's by definition the way evolution works. The theory of evolution requires that. Without a natural cause, you cannot have evolution. Religion drives science, and it matters.